Christian Horner is back in the headlines, and this time no longer as the powerful team principal of Red Bull Racing, but as a free agent with a severance package in his pocket and a mountain of open questions. Officially, the Briton parted ways with the Austrian team on Monday after both parties agreed to a severance package estimated at around £80 million. This ends an era of almost 2 decades, during which Horner transformed the team from a newcomer to a dominant force, brought in 8 drivers and 6 constructors' titles, while remaining a polarizing character in the paddock. But the story doesn't end there, quite the opposite. Now it's about whether and how Horner returns. The timing is explosive. Red Bull itself is in a phase of upheaval, while McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes find themselves in a fierce 3-way battle for the top. Horner has proven in recent years that he is not only a strategist, but also a power politician, someone who knows how to build networks and unite sponsors, drivers, and engineers behind him. This is exactly what makes him attractive to investors and potential partners. According to Sky reporter Craig Slater, several major business partners have already approached Horner: venture capital groups, sovereign funds, and international corporations that want to invest in Formula One. In other words, money is not the problem. The question is where Horner applies his leverage. One option would be buying shares in an existing team: Aston Martin, Alpine, Haas, or even Williams. All structures that could either use financial support or whose owners would be willing to sell with the right offer. Horner brings not only capital, but above all credibility. Anyone who has organized 8 world championships with Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen is seen everywhere as a guarantee of success. However, it remains open whether the current team principals and owners would be willing to bring such a dominant personality into their house. The second option would be a complete fresh start with a new team. From 2026, the field expands with the entry of Cadillac/Andretti, but the FIA has already signaled that it is open to long-term investments. Horner could therefore build a project from scratch with his financiers. But the risk is high. A new team needs years to become competitive. And Horner, 51 years old, would have to ask himself whether he is ready to undertake such a long construction effort, or whether he would rather rely on existing structures to get back to fighting for victories more quickly. The political dimension is also fascinating. Horner is not leaving Red Bull in triumph, but in conflict. His departure was marked by weak sporting results, internal conflicts, and accusations that damaged his image. For him, a quick return is also a matter of ego. Can he prove that his success was not only based on Red Bull's resources and Adrian Newey's genius, but on his own leadership strength? This is precisely why he is said to have been willing to forego around £30 million from the severance package to return to the pit wall more quickly. Formula One itself is in a moment where figures like Horner are needed, but also feared. The teams have become more than ever global companies, controlled by corporations and investors. A politically savvy puppet master like Horner could serve here as a door opener, or as a disruptive factor. Liberty Media knows that personalities like him produce headlines, attract viewers, and keep the series exciting. But at the same time, his return carries conflict potential, old rivalries, open accounts, and the question of whether he would immediately pursue an aggressive agenda at a Red Bull competitor. It's clear, Horner himself is still holding back publicly. He knows he cannot make hasty statements as long as his departure is still being processed. But the signs are unmistakable. Talks are ongoing, contacts are being made, and the rumor mill is bubbling. As early as summer 2026, he could return with a new role. The central question is, with whom? If you consider the options in detail, it becomes clear that any possible return of Christian Horner to Formula One would trigger a political earthquake. The most realistic appears to be entry through an existing team that, on one hand, has the structures, but on the other hand, is not at the absolute top. Aston Martin, Alpine, Haas, and Williams are those candidates that have been repeatedly discussed in connection with investors in recent months, and for whom Horner's name immediately emerges as a possible pivot point. Let's start with Aston Martin. Lawrence Stroll's team has a strong technical foundation and a state-of-the-art factory in Silverstone. However, the results of recent seasons remained far behind ambitions, despite Fernando Alonso as the spearhead. A Horner entry could lift the sporting management to a new level. At the same time, it would be politically highly explosive. Lawrence Stroll would have to be willing to give up responsibility or at least share power, which contradicts his nature. Horner as team principal under Stroll Sr. and simultaneously the father of the second driver in the cockpit? That sounds more like a powder keg than a success model. Alpine would be another possibility. Renault has made the long-term commitment to Formula One, but struggles with management turmoil and disappointing performances. For Horner, it could be attractive to take over a works team with direct manufacturer support and transform it into a real winning team. However, Alpine has proven to be a cumbersome structure with political baggage in recent years. Horner could clean house here, but he would have to prepare for endless internal power struggles with the French group management. Haas, in turn, is an interesting target because the US team, despite years of presence, has barely managed to make the jump from the back of the field. Gene Haas has signaled several times that he will only continue long-term if the project remains economically sensible. A sale or partial sale would be conceivable. For Horner, this could be an opportunity to take over a team with a relatively low entry barrier and build it up step by step. The challenge, however, would be winning world-class sponsors and engineers, something Haas has barely managed to do so far. Horner would bring the contacts, but it would be a long and rocky road. Williams finally, with James Vowles at the helm, has a clear plan to bring the traditional team back to the top. But here too applies. Money and know-how are decisive. A Horner entry could give Williams the boost the team needs to advance more quickly into the top teams. Politically, however, it would be delicate. Vowles and Horner are two alpha figures who could hardly coexist side by side. It would be a power struggle programmed in advance. There remains the radical option: a completely new team. With the planned Andretti entry from 2026, the FIA has proven that it is open to new players. Horner could try with his investors to get an 11th or 12th team off the ground, but the costs are enormous, the barriers at the FIA high, and the schedule tight. Even with abundant capital, such a project would take years before victories or titles became realistic. For Horner, this could serve more as a threatening backdrop, to put pressure on existing teams and drive up the price of shares. Interesting is how Red Bull itself reacts to these rumors. Officially, silence reigns, but internally they know that Horner would immediately become a threat with a comeback. He knows the structures, the weak points, the networks of the team. Should he join a rival, he could systematically poach personnel or redirect sponsors. This is precisely why Red Bull should have tried to block his return path for as long as possible. In the end, however, they accepted a faster return because the price of £80 million seemed high enough. For Formula One as a whole, the question arises, is a Christian Horner 2.0 an enrichment or a burden? On one hand, he brings experience, charisma, and the ability to generate headlines. On the other hand, he stands for power games, controversies, and an aggressive agenda that was not always in the interest of the sport. The coming months will show whether he really takes concrete steps or whether much remains just a pressure tool. But it's already clear, should Horner appear in 2026 or 2027 with a new team, or at the head of a traditional racing stable, the paddock would be shaken, and Red Bull would have to prepare for a bitter political adversary.